Good evening. My name is Ileana Selejan. I am an art historian and curator from Romania, and I'm here to introduce tonight's screening. You will be seeing films produced by a number of artists and groups. To start with, films produced by Kinema Ikon. Kinema Ikon is a group that I am a member of, that I have been collaborating with for a number of years. They started their activity in 1970, and they're still working now, primarily within the field of art and technology. In 1970, George Sabau, who was an art professor at the local arts high school in Arad, in the city of Arad in western Romania, had this grand idea that he wanted to start a workshop for filmmakers, specifically for experimental filmmakers. Now, you can imagine in 1970, this was quite a challenge, because not only was there a very strict kind of ideological imposition on whenever it came to the production of art and culture, but also because there was the access to materials and to camera technology was very restricted. So in order to procure the materials needed for filmmaking and the authorizations to kind of go ahead with this project, they came to an agreement with the local authorities that the group would produce 62 documentary films. And it was on the backs of those 62, of those 62 documentary films that the group produced an exact equivalent number of 62 experimental films, because they were saving film stock from the documentaries, yeah? So the group coalesced around this very important figure of George Sabau, a filmmaker himself, and by the mid-70s, they already started producing films on their own. They were students, so they were quite young when they started. Some were 16, some were 18. And then later went to university and they stayed as a part of the group. And later, they continued working as professional artists or in other professions, and they still were a part of the group. And the group was active for 2 decades in this experimental phase until the Romanian Revolution of 1989. And after that, they started experimenting with computer art and with multimedia, which they're doing to date. Now, some of the films that you will see tonight show this range of interests and activities that the group was invested in. Many of them came from different backgrounds. Some, as I was saying, later would go into computer art, but some came from a cybernetics and computer came from that kind of background. Others, they even had a DJ, and actually one of the films that you were going to see tonight, Stereomania, was produced by the group's DJ. And you will see music becomes a very important aspect, and I hope some of you managed to see the previous screenings in the nights before. As you will see, music becomes very, very important to these films. Kinema Ikon was using contemporary music, especially contemporary jazz and rock music that was actually banned by the regime, and that was kind of procured underground. The first film, actually, and I should have started with that you're going to see tonight, was produced by George Sabau, the leader of the group. And George Sabau came up with this theory about the film, and about the filmed image, the moving image. And he amassed throughout the 2 decades, something that he called the image bank. So basically fragments of everyday life that he collected on the streets, at the group's meeting, in private spaces, that were then kind of dumped together within this archive that, again, he called the image bank. And from there, he kind of took different fragments and recomposed them according to a logic of its own in several of his films. Fragmentarium is one such film, and as you will see, there's almost an obsessive fixation with these fragments that are recomposed into a narrative that seems completely random and completely absurd, but that nonetheless kind of starts to capture a logic of its own. Another film that you're seeing tonight by Emanuel Ţeţ. Emanuel Ţeţ was one of the group members who was very interested in playing with the very surface of the film, the very texture of the film, by scratching on, painting on. You will see that in the film. Very beautiful and very poetic gestures, but again, there's a playfulness and a randomness that borders on the absurd. There's a nod here to Dada and to Surrealism, which were 2 avant-garde movements that the filmmakers were very drawn to. And you see a similar kind of interest in, especially Surrealism, in the next film on the program, by Ioan T. Morar, which has autobiographical elements, but nonetheless it also kind of captures some of this surrealist absurdity. Many have wondered about this film in particular, whether it has any kind of hidden messages, whether it's commentary on the contemporary social situation, the contemporary political situation, but the film never really reveals itself. And the filmmakers, whenever asked, as well as Dr. Sabau, they will say, well, we were interested in filmic experimentation, we were interested in play, we were not interested in making political commentary. Nonetheless, the films do have this kind of afterthought, given the context that they were made in. And Sabau himself has said that there is a possibility that the films capture a lot of the kind of the dense atmosphere of the time, the pressures of that were experienced in real life by these filmmakers at the time. Another film that you are going to see by another member of kinema ikon, Alexandru Pecican, which is immediately thereafter, it actually has subliminality within its very title. But nonetheless, as I was saying, the films never quite reveal themselves. They just kind of point potentially in that direction. There's a frantic action in this film in particular. It's completely nonsensical. So in Alexandru Pecican's film, this subliminality is actually in the title, but the film, once again, never quite reveals any kind of hidden meaning or any kind of political. It never really reveals itself. Rather, it takes the viewer into this kind of spinning narrative this kind of frantic, nonsensical story accompanied by recognizable music, including by Pink Floyd. A very similar strategy is taken up by Ioan Grigorescu, who is a contemporary artist working in the capital city in Bucharest, and who was producing films using 16mm technology, the same as kinema ikon, but primarily within the confines of his studio and his home, very often using his body as material. In this film, which is shot outside and in color, he is playing with the camera in very direct, almost very brutal ways, with complete disregard of the viewer's experience. The films are quite the film, similarly to kinema ikon films, are sometimes quite difficult to watch because the camera makes these very sudden, disorienting turns. It's quite dizzying, even nauseating at times. And this is a deliberate kind of attempt on behalf of Grigorescu to play with an embodiment, the connection between the body and the camera, the embodiment of one's persona onto film. So it's quite an interesting film. And then the screening ends with a fantastic film by Mircea Săucan, who is a Romanian, French-born filmmaker and writer, very interesting character who ended up leaving Romania due to the pressures of the regime. And this film was actually made under it was staged, it was set up as a labor protection film, as an educational film produced by the state. But nonetheless, as you will see, it immediately kind of turns on its own head and becomes this rather fantastic experimental film overlaid onto the narrative of a love story between the two protagonists. There's several moments in the film where it feels like it's making very direct commentary onto contemporary politics. There's one moment in which the two protagonists speaking, one of them says, "You can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this," which is something that immediately, while it serves this immediate purpose, we're talking about labor protection, we're talking about working in a factory, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this because you'll injure yourself. But at the same time, that makes one think about all the strictures of the regime at the time that was telling you, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. So in that way, the film can be seen very much as a directly political film. Something that in many of the kinema ikon film might be hinted at, but is never really made as a direct statement. So I'll leave you with that. Enjoy the screening tonight, and thank you very much.